Okay, here we go. Hey, welcome to Gun Talk Hunt. I'm actually joined by some guys up here at AOB. If you don't know AOB, they kind of have brands like Caldwell, BOG, and that's actually who I'm joined with. I'm enjoyed the company of Box. We're just going to call him Box because that's really his name. And if you picture this giant box, like that's Box. And this Jarrod Grove and Jason Nickerson of BOG. So welcome in, guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having us.
And this Gun Talk Hunt is brought to you by Timney in Springfield. If you guys know Timney, you guys know good triggers, right? I mean, you guys have to shoot them all the time. You guys are behind the trigger a lot with what you guys do. You're always shooting steel box.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all the time.
Hey, if you don't have a good trigger, you can't hit it, right?
Well, I mean, you could, but it's going to make your life a lot easier if you just throw in a Timney. They're 700 Remington trigger, you know, the Calvin Elites, all those good triggers, phenomenal triggers. And of course, ATN Optics, we're also proudly supported by ATN. And Box, we were talking just a little bit before this, and you are the ATN guy.
Oh my gosh. Thermal is, if you don't have a thermal, you should do yourself a favor and get a thermal.
Yeah. Well, and their new line of thermals is the LT line, which is mostly, you know, you don't get the benefit of recording, but you get all the benefits of thermal. And what I'm using it for is when we enter the field, you know, in the early morning hours and you don't want to bump deer off your stand, stuff like that. Highly important, or you don't get sprayed by skunks. You can see them before they see you. And I think that's one of the most important things. And you guys know entering the field is kind of a double-edged sword. You know, you want to get in, you want to get out quietly, but you know, it's a dangerous situation when you're in skunk country.
Not a good cover.
Just cover scent, yeah.
Cover scent. No, that's the last thing I would want is a skunk cover scent. That ruins a hunt in T-minus 2 seconds. That tail goes up and you're like, oh, screw this, I'm out.
Yep, go on.
But no, we were talking about this before, and you know, we talk about whitetail hunting. And that's really, you know, 80% of the country who hunts is typically a whitetail hunter. And Box was telling us a story that is just appalling. And it was almost, it made me sick to my stomach. And I'm going to let you jump into this. This is his, first hunting experience with whitetail?
Yeah, hunting by myself.
By himself. So set this story up. You're in the woods and you're doing a drive. You're not doing a stand sit or anything like that.
So, yeah. I didn't have, like, my father hunted, but he wasn't a trophy hunter. And so it was a little different. But when I was finally old enough to go out by myself, I'd go sit with him. He'd take me hunting as a kid. And so he'd usually shoot the first thing that came by that was legal. That's all he was going for. And so I was 10 and he was like, okay, you can hunt by yourself. And so I think I was supposed to be the pusher. I'm supposed to run these deer out of some thickets and some warm season grasses.
Yeah.
And so I'm walking through there, and this deer stands up, and I mean, it stands up pretty close. I shoot it, and it falls down, and I go out and tell my dad, I'm like, I just shot this big buck. He's like, okay, whatever. Because I mean, at that time, like a basket rack 8-pointer was, you know, like all that I had seen.
Well, and to a 10-year-old kid, a basket rack or any buck is just a monster.
Yep. Right.
But if you're not familiar with a deer drive, that's kind of it's more of a Midwestern thing, I find, is that, you know, guys will, you know, push a bunch of woods and, you know, they drop guys off at the end and, you know, you just basically walk the woods and whatever comes out is probably going to get shot.
Yep. Right.
And so you're sitting there and you're walking in, you shoot this big buck.
I shoot this buck and I'm pumped. I just know that it's big. I had never heard of anything of like scoring a deer. Like that was a totally foreign concept. So I just knew that I shot deer. And of course, like you're trying to add up the points and you're telling all your friends at school the next day that you shot some 20-point buck when really it was a 14, but it had like little bumps.
Just a 14.
But you counted everything you could hang a ring on, right? So it was like, it was crazy.
It probably added up to like 30.
Yeah, it was really cool. And it went, and you know, I just knew that I'd shot a nice deer for probably till I was like 13. And that was when I got introduced to like actual professional hunters. A friend of mine's family farmed in Pike County, Illinois.
Which is the Golden Triangle,
Right.
the mecca of whitetail kind of Midwestern hunting.
Right.
It's a 3-county area.
Yeah, and they were big and early adopters of QDMA practices, so they managed the farm for deer. And we were sitting in this old farmhouse having breakfast, and his uncle was kind of bragging about these deer heads on the wall. And he's like, "You're Missouri boy, probably never seen one like that." And of course, we're just on the other side of the river from
Right.
them anyway. But I was like, "No, I shot one that big." And he's like, "No way, what did it score?" And I started talking about points, and he was like, "No," and he's like, "That's a 180-inch deer." And I was like, "Well, I don't know how tall it was or what it weighed or anything, you know? Like, I have no idea what this guy's talking about." And so he's like, "Well, next time you come over, bring it over." And so I brought the rack over, and he measured it, and it ended up like over the years, a couple different people had measured it, and it's somewhere around that in the low 180s.
But I think it's important to note that when you shot this deer, meat hunters.
Oh yeah.
You
We
shot
just
this
took it
deer.
to the processing plant.
You didn't mount it.
No,
There's
no.
no caping,
So,
nothing like that.
Number one, my mom had a very strict no dead animals in the house rule. She let us have a lot of guns. So I mean, you pick your battles, right? So there was that and playing into the fact, and then the fact that I didn't know what to add. So yeah, the guy at the processor was like, "Hey kid, you want the horns off this?" And I said, "Yeah." And he pulls out the old meat saw and cuts the skull cap off.
Oh my!
That's the other part, though. So the guy didn't even ask. This is a 180-inch deer.
Yeah.
He doesn't even ask, "Do you want to mount this? This is huge. Hey, you want to knock this off? You just want to throw it in the trash, or what are you gonna do with this?"
And he was gonna if you were like, "No, I don't really want the horn," he was gonna get rid of him. No, he was gonna go sell them to his
He's
buddy.
probably
is
gonna
what
sell
he's
them.
gonna do.
It was, right? It was early 90s.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I don't know. It wasn't as crazy back then around where we were at.
Well, and I think that's kind of the whole process of, because I remember those days, and one of my first deer was shot on a deer drive in Oklahoma, but I think it wasn't about, it was about sustainability. We were just looking for meat. I mean, that's what we did with these deer, and that's what we continue to do. But now all of a sudden we're with the QDMA practices, and Jason, you see this a lot out in the field.
Yep.
You actually practice this on your farm,
Right. Absolutely.
which makes a huge difference in rack size. And it's not all about rack size, but sure is nice.
Yeah, and you heard that, when I was younger, the same thing. I think I did one deer drive, but it was pretty common. You don't hear about it a whole lot these days. I'm sure it happens. I'm sure it is in certain regions and stuff. But the big buck was, I shot an 8-pointer. That's a pretty good buck.
Yeah.
Well, I shot a big buck as a 10-pointer, and that's all. That's how everything. To your point, that's how it was classified. It wasn't. I shot a 165-inch deer that was a 6-year-old. Nowadays we're managing for age. We're managing for the genes, and
Right.
it's just a whole different world. It's a big change.
And I guess my question to you guys is: Are we setting ourselves up for, are we creating unrealistic expectations for the next generation of hunters? I mean, because think about it. Like, it's all what he score. What's the first question out of your mouth?
Yeah.
How much meat did you get out of it? No, that's not what I ask. And I'm as guilty as anybody of it. What did it score?
Yeah, I mean, me and Randy Birdsong had a good talk about that on the way back from our trip to Wyoming. And it was about, I worked at Bass Pro for 7 years, and knowing how to measure deer. And my roommate at the time was a certified Boone and Crockett scorer. And people would bring stuff in, and they'd be, chest puffed out walking in, and it'd be a nice deer, and you score it, and it'd just not be the number that they thought it was. And all of a sudden you see them, and you're like, "Hey man, that's a 150-inch 8-pointer. That's a huge deer."
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for an 8-pointer, mass.
I figured it'd be 200, and you're like, don't get hung up on that number.
Right.
So yeah, me and Randy were talking about, and then, he says, his show's a little different, and there's a lot. I think hopefully there's more of the push to, your trophy is what you make it. Like, it's not the animal, right? It's the
Right.
Like, you do the management. Like, I think if you manage your deer herd, when you get a mature buck that you've watched and you've seen, then that's a trophy no matter how big he goes. Because not every deer is going to break the huge numbers. He may tap out in the 120s, 130s, whatever it is.
Well, and that all has to do.
That
all has to do with your management style and how far along you are in the development process of your property. But for those who don't know, like, when you measure a deer, you're measuring tine length, you're measuring width, you're measuring mass, and so all those create this score. And it's I get hung up on score, I really do, and I know I shouldn't, but this year, I really when we take first time hunters out. Like, what are you taking them after? Are you taking them after what they would be happy with, or what you want them to shoot?
Right.
off your property. Because think about
Yes.
that.
No, you gotta let them. You gotta let them shoot whatever they think's a trophy, bud.
Well, what are you doing, Jason?
I don't know. I kind of go back and forth on this, right? I honestly, so I grew up, I shot a Bass Crack 8. He was a grade 8. He was a year and a half old, though, right? So I'm a little biased on seeing, if somebody go out their first hunt and shoot a 200-inch deer. It may ruin them, it may not, but it's unrealistic expectations. I mean, most of us will never shoot over a 150. I mean, and 150 would be a trophy for a lot, probably even a majority of those people. So I kind of go back and forth on that. And I think to your point earlier about asking, do we kind of set the future generations up? I think it's possible, but I think it also comes down to either parents or mentors in the field really saying, hey, yeah, we're chasing huge deer, but I think that management by age and also managing, like you said, 120, 130 inch 8-pointer that's 5-6 years old, you really need to get him out of the herd. Yeah. And I mean, at that point, your genetics are going to improve over the years. But I think, again, like you said, Box, like just making sure, hey, what you shoot, be happy with what you shoot, no regrets, and just understanding that everything's a trophy. I mean, you took a life, so we can't sit there and marginalize that.
Oh, I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of what we were talking about, because you end up having neighbors and you talk about it and you try to, if you get everybody kind of on board and you just agree that, hey, do pass on the young ones, especially if you've shot one, and it'll make huge gains. Like when you literally just go, okay, hey, and we're lucky in Missouri where we don't have to shoot an antler deer. That I think helped us out a lot. Was guys that used to have to shoot an antler deer, so the first, and they weren't
right.
It was somewhat uncommon, so you shot the first thing if you wanted something to eat for venison. Because that's another thing. Like in Missouri, the guys live to go out, and they consider that a protein source for the year.
Yeah. So
they need to go harvest a deer. If you can tell them, hey, take a doe out of the herd, or don't shoot the young bucks. If you don't want to wait on a mature buck to come by. But I think the youth ones, man, you got to let them shoot something. I would never discourage them from shooting, even if it's a young buck. If that's their trophy and it gets them hooked in. Yeah. But I'll tell you right now, if you people say, oh, you get ruined if you shoot a big one first. Jason or KJ, you guys go out and shoot a 200-inch deer this year. I guarantee you're back in the woods the next year.
Oh, the next day.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, because it just feeds that. It feeds that desire to go out and be amongst nature.
And you'll still get pumped every time. I mean, you draw back on a doe, and man, if your adrenaline doesn't rush, then maybe
hang it up.
Hang it up. Go chase something you can look at.
Go chase something else. I mean, but there's always something else out there, and I think as hunters, and especially those guys who want to take more meat and put more meat on the table, especially given the times where we live in now, when we don't know if there's going to be a meat shortage, or someone says, well, you can't, there's nothing in the grocery store. Well, no, my freezer's filled to the brim of wild venison. Came from. Yeah, you know where it came from, and that's as organic as it gets.
Right. Yeah.
But I guess one of my other topics is gear for the hunter. And you guys, this is your arena, right? This is how does a new hunter go into these stores and go, what do I need? What's your advice?
I think it's a learning process. Part of it obviously is research, but everyone starts somewhere. And I think that unless there's mentors to a new hunter or friends that kind of guide them, typically what you'll see is they'll start on low end products, and then as they find it doesn't fulfill what they need or whatever it is, they'll kind of work their way up if they can. I mean, not everybody can, and that's okay too. So there's a place for everything. But I mean, I did it over the years, and this built up a little bit of doing that too.
Your game up. You start inch by inch. You do step your game up, and you realize what works and what doesn't work for your hunting style, because there's all different types of hunting styles out there.
Sure.
But I think you need to practice a lot. You need to gain that woodsmanship, and you need to be stable in the field. And that's one of the reasons why, like Jason, I'm glad you're on here, because BOG used to be Bog Pod.
Right.
And they made their living on stability.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the coolest things that I still use, an original Bog Pod. I still have it, it still works. But I think you find out real quick, more of the reputable brands, it might cost just a little bit more, but just save some pennies. If you can save over the summer, do what you got to do, and you'll get some good access to gear.
Yeah. Right, you'll end up with something like you have where you use it for season after season instead of replacing it every year.
Right.
Yeah. And that's where you find yourself in that trap. Is just, the same thing with fishing equipment or anything else. Is like, okay, well, I broke that rod, or I broke this year, and by the time you replace it 3 or 4 times, you could have had two things that would
Right.
lasted forever, or at least several years.
That's right. And we got, so right before all this, we got on a little topic of game cameras, and BOG is coming out with new game cameras.
Yes.
It is really cool. And what guys use game cameras for is to monitor, the deer on their property or something like that. And it is a highly effective way to maximize your time in the field, especially if you don't have a lot of time. Kind of walk through what you guys are putting out now, because I think it's actually really cool and is a useful tool.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the game camera market, there's a lot of great companies in there, and it's something that we knew there was we had to be different going in, and we wanted to be different. We didn't want to just kind of find the mix and get in that white noise space. And so what we did was we set out to make the best camera we could, best in class imagery, but also kind of what we've taken on as a mission with BOG when we rebranded this is that we would solve problems. I mean, that's the thing and then I'm sure somebody else will find something that they think's even better than this. But what we set out to do is, be a leader in innovation and just solve a lot of the issues we saw as hunters. So kind of on these game camera front, the very, very first thing, well, I should say two things. So the best in class imagery was the requirement. And then the menu systems historically are pretty rough. I mean,
yes,
I've ran cameras for 20 years and there was occasional cameras where I have to go to an instruction manual, which is really at this point should not
And
happen.
as guys, we hate to do that anyway.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Like, you don't want to open up that manual. You'll do everything you can
For sure.
not to crack it.
Yep. So what we did is we kind of came out with I probably should talk about the menu system or the removable viewer, but just to talk about the menu for a second, we went to a user interface that's icon based.
Right.
So there's a play button and it says,
and everybody's
playback
familiar.
on it,
That's what's great about it nowadays is everybody's familiar with icons.
Yep.
Like, that's how we kind of operate our day to day.
Yep. And that's how we wanted to set it up is everyone's got cellular phones. I can't believe I just said cellular phones. Is it 1995 again, or what's going on? But
cellular.
Everyone's got an iPhone and all that stuff. So everyone's already doing icon-based everything. And let's just make it easy. Let's make it something that you don't have to go back to 1995 and look at a green menu with three letters that you hope you know what you're doing on it.
Yeah.
So,
and if you cycle through, because that's one of the most frustrating things with the old style cameras, are that you like cycle through and then you miss it and you're like, crap, I got to go back.
Right.
And you go back through it again, and it takes longer in the field. And you guys are finding ways to eliminate this time in the field and the time by your cameras, because that was one of my most frustrating things, because the maximum amount of cameras I ran at one time were 37 cameras. That may seem like a lot, but I've known guys that run 200 cameras.
yes.
And
Absolutely.
that's a lot of time in the field to be changing stuff out.
For sure. And that's kind of to your point about the time in the field. So the really big feed or kind of hook on this now is it has a removable viewer, or it's a menu too. It's basically the guts outside of the sensor. And so you pop that out, we actually will sell the unit separately as well. So you can, let's say you had 10 cameras, you can buy 2-3 of those. And if you're on your way to your stand or ground blind or whatever
it's a simple push button. It drops out the bottom. You've got your viewer, so you can take it into the stand with you.
Right.
And I think that's one of the coolest things is, before, daylight or it's, slow movement, you being able to check your cameras and to see what time those deer are coming in or coming by that area. And if you're running a lot of cameras, I'm going to caution you, because I got burned on that, because I don't think a lot of people understand that deer pattern you.
Yes.
And they know your milk runs, they know what areas to stay out. And I mean, you guys have had to have had some encounters like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. You definitely see it and kind of how they move. And you can tell when you've gotten an area that they didn't expect you to be in, because all of a sudden 3 big bucks I had that happen last year. I think it was putting up a camera, going in an area that I hadn't put one in 3 years. And you could tell they didn't expect me there. There were 3 big ones, and who knows where they went, but they didn't go on my wall. I can tell you that.
Yeah. I mean, but they understand that. I mean, you essentially, when you go into a hunting area, I mean, you're going into where they live every day. It's like if someone came to your home and moved something, you know where that is, you know your home, and that's essentially what you're doing. And by utilizing game cameras, and like I said, I've got very strong opinions on game cameras now, because I've burned myself so many times with them, setting up an area and stuff like that, where I had bucks on camera the week before, and I go in to check them the next week, they're gone.
Yep.
So,
yeah. And to your point, I mean, you don't want to spend any time there. So cellular is obviously catching on huge now, but you can't have cellular everywhere. I mean, there's a lot of places that do not get tower.
Right.
So this removable viewer just makes it, you want to spend as little, especially if it's in a buck's bedroom, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
You want to spend as little time there as possible. Pop that viewer out, pop another one in, and get out of there. Like, don't set that place up. Don't let them know you're there.
It's super easy.
Yeah,
I mean,
and image quality's just been crazy. We're launching these July 1st. So Midway USA is actually our exclusive launch partner, and they're helping us out on that. But it's been pretty crazy on the image quality and the video quality we've been getting on these.
All right, give me what we're talking about here, because I honestly think guys are like, well, what camera is he talking about? What BOG camera is this?
Secret, right?
Yeah. Are they keeping it from us? Come on, give us the name.
It's a reverse psychology thing for marketing. We won't tell you what it is.
We're gonna keep you on the hook.
So we have the BOG Blood Moon. We actually came out with 2 cameras this year. There's no reason to come out with 10 cameras and flood the market. Let's do 2 right. The BOG Blood Moon is a dual sensor infrared, 22 megapixel. It's actually sub 0.2 second. I think it's a 0.16 second shutter speeds, 120 foot flash, and just with all these high quality components we put in, we didn't skimp on this. This is
and they have options, in most all cameras, you have options to, film in HD. You can turn the video on or off, and that restricts the amount of storage that you might have on the SD card. Are you guys putting in like a 64 card? Like an SD card?
Nothing with it. It will support up to 512.
Okay.
So, but we don't actually have anything with it currently.
Right.
So that's kind of your point. That's becoming more and more. And as they get bigger files, obviously you're needing more space. And, so that's that. And then we had the clandestine is the invisible flash. So it's kind of like I think I always say the introverted little brother, but
really?
I mean, it's the 18 megapixel. The flash range is still 100 feet, which is pretty crazy
that's more than you'll need.
Yeah.
I mean, especially if you get back in these thick areas. I mean, you're going to have them right in your face.
Yep.
So that's great. So. Well, all right, guys. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up. We're going to definitely touch base on this, but if you're out there, you're looking to get into hunting, I highly encourage it. Thank you guys for joining Gun Talk Hunt, and we will see you next week.